Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to yet another edition of Take 3. I'm Anand Narasimhan, with me Zaka Jacob. But first we'll go to Rahul Shivshankar, who's just come back from Tianjin on the sidelines of the SCO. We'll talk about SCO, we'll talk about GST. But Rahul, ni hao ma?
I made the heavenly crossing. Tianjin is called heavenly crossing, by the way.
So how
And so
heavenly
did the
was it,
Prime
or
Minister.
how nightmarish was it?
Well, it's not a nightmare. Look, this is my first time in China. Its reputation, of course, here in India is very different from what you encounter. So, obviously, there are two faces to this country. The one that they project through hard power internationally, and the one they reserve for people who visit, which is an extremely cordial, amenable sort. Very courteous. Nothing is ever out of place. Nothing is ever said out of place. And quite frankly, the country intimidates because you see the kind of development that you see only in the West. Perhaps this is even now at some levels, and Tianjin is not even in the top 10 by GDP cities. But it looks as if China is far ahead right now.
He's come back a changed man. Zaka, he's been there. He's been there.
But I haven't come back a changed man.
His pride is where's that?
I've understood the gap now in concrete terms and what we need to do to close this gap.
How big is the gap?
Look, I can't put it down. So let me put it this way. If people have gone to Singapore or people have gone to the best parts of America,
Let's say New York, yeah.
New York, well, it's a lot of that.
Okay.
Constantly. Tianjin is a slightly different kettle of fish from what I'm told the other cities are, because it retains a lot of its colonial past. So it's got 6 different colonial concessions were there. And you see architecture that you see in Prague or in the continent. And then you see it here. And they are almost, there's this hulking presence of a faux brutalist style of architecture that you encounter in communist countries of the old Soviet Union. So towering, hulking buildings, now of course sort of gleaming with glass frontages.
So now you have all of these, like you would go to a central business district, like you would go to,
Exactly.
Times
So
Square
it's
or
towering,
Yeah.
but then you have these beautiful squat buildings which are a nod to their past. But these buildings assert themselves, like the incredible Hulk would, to say that, look, we've beaten that.
Yeah.
That was where we were. We're not destroying it, but we built on that, and we're here. The thing is that these are, look, I have this theory about where the roads are really straight and long. You see those in countries where land acquisition happens like that. China, being a bit of an authoritarian state, has the leeway to say, okay, we want to build something now, here, and it will be built.
Yeah.
In India, you'll see, roads.
You circumvent and you adjust and make...
Or stalled sometimes,
Yeah.
projects, and we know of a few just in Delhi.
Correct.
And then, of course, in America, where the land, was the gateway to settlement. So you had a road first, and then people came, or the railroad first, and then people came and settled around it. So that's the difference. But there is definitely, there is very little spontaneity in the society. So there's no real sense of openness and freedom. And, you have that debate with yourself, whether you like it or not. What is freedom? What does it mean? Does it mean that everyone should be liberated from hunger? Because if that is what it means to you elementally, then, well, this is a successful model. But if it means that everyone should be liberated from a certain straitjacket, and should have the ability to express their individuality, then obviously we have the Indian, the American model and the European model, and so there are two competing models.
Correct. Okay.
And I am somewhere right now, straddling the middle. I don't know, maybe we could have adopted some from here and taken some from here. I think we really need to develop now a sense of community and urgency.
Yeah. So that I think as a society needs to
Yes.
percolate.
You can't leave everything now to the Mai Baap Sarkar if you have to succeed today. Yes, it can be a facilitator, but the level of discipline, cleanliness, and we were having that conversation that if people get a home and a roof above their head, certain amount of predictability and permanence, you might feel that you're part, you got a stake in this society, so you'll probably work together. It's like, all of us living in apartments, for example, you have RWAs or neighborhoods, and you actually do work with your neighbors to try and make life easier and more conducive for yourselves. A lot of Indians don't have that luxury, and maybe that's why we are sort of, and it's all pop psychology and sociology, but maybe we don't have so many, attachments to where we are, so we don't think in a community way, in a community space. I think that time has come.
Right. So let's try and understand where was Bharat in terms of perception and also at the table. So was it all purely optics, very carefully crafted, or really there was a sense of elevation in the stature for Bharat and Prime Minister Modi?
Look, there's no doubt that among even ordinary Chinese, there is now respect for Bharat.
Okay.
They have realized that this is not another Pakistan that you can, reduce to a client state. This is a serious world power. This is a power that we have to contend with. Now we can choose to respect it, or we can choose to, have an antagonistic relationship with. The sense I was getting, and remember, the Prime Minister not only met Xi Jinping, but also a very high-ranking official, Sai Chi from the Communist Party, which shows that the Chinese are this time interested in, at some level or the other, trying to ensure that we have a degree now of cooperation between us. Now, whether that has happened because they've also learned a few lessons, they've also suffered. Look, they weren't getting a pie of our market. That has also had an impact. There's a lot of, as Zaka was telling me, there's a lot of overcapacity building there, slowing down the economy. You've seen it.
Correct.
And India, of course, growing at 7.8%. No one expected these numbers, least of all us. So clearly, we are closing that gap. And there is now a very real understanding that India needs to exert itself, and it must now be allowed to do so. Otherwise, we're going to have these constant. This is not an India that's going to allow you to walk around their territory, sort of do boo to their troops and go away. No, you'll get it back. And either you contend that way and you ruin your own economy and reduce this to a zero-sum game where only one succeeds, or you then work together because you have acres of space being vacated by the West, which you can actually get into.
We had extended talk time for Rahul today because he was in Tianjin over those 3-4 hours. But somewhere did Op Sindoor also perhaps add to this, Zaka? You've also been speaking and you've been there. There's a perception of Bharat earlier. There's a perception of it now. You see that change happening. And the conversations that you had around the SCO also.
I think when Galwan happened 5 years ago, I think the Chinese, there was certainly a section within the Chinese political leadership and even the military leadership that thought, it's COVID and the whole world is shut down. If we now attack and try and grab some space, the Indians will sort of wither away, or they'll have to recede. I don't think they expected the degree to which India fought back, especially that operation that happened in August, the taking of the ranges, and they were forced to go back from the south end of the Pangong Lake. I think that completely caught them by surprise. I don't think the Chinese expected India to hold out for so long. I mean, it went on for a good 4 years till Kazan happened last year and they began the process of disengagement. China internally also, as Rahul was saying, since COVID struck, has been going through a lot of internal churn because they build like massively. Their cities are big, their factories are big, their universities are big, their businesses are big. But you got somebody, you need somebody to sell this to, right? So from 78, when Deng Xiaoping opened up the Chinese economy, they were primarily selling to the West. They were selling to the US and they were selling to Europe. But now with the US, over the last 5 years, there has got to a point where, in fact, even during the Biden administration and before that, even in Trump 1, a lot of trade, particularly high-end trade, semiconductors, high-end mechanics and robotics and so on, there was a complete clamp down by the US on China. So China realized that we can't do trade. I mean, we can sell textiles and shoes and things like that, lower end of manufacturing, but the higher end of manufacturing, the US is shutting us off.
Right.
So they started looking at other avenues, other markets, and if it was not for the political problems with India, if it was not for this boundary clash that happened, they would have been happy to do business with India, and India would have been happy to do business with them. But the military clash happened, and India then said, we're going to clamp down on your apps, we're going to clamp down on your FDI, we're going to have this extra layer of security process for your companies to come in. Now I think there's growing realization in China that, we need India on our side. We need to ensure that even if India is not on our side, at least India should not become an active partner of the West like Japan has or like South Korea has, because then the Chinese feel,
the narrative actually slips away.
Not just the narrative, they also feel the same thing that they are trying to do to us. They feel a degree of encirclement. You basically look from the East China Sea all the way to the Indian Ocean region. It's sort of littered with these American partners or American friends, basically a West. Which is why the Chinese had such a huge problem with the Quad. They were like, this is basically to contain us, right? Whether it was not or otherwise, that's debatable. But I think there's now a growing realization, and also India's problems with the West, and in particular with America, is sort of moving us in that direction where, look, we don't want to be friends, maybe we can't be friends, but let's not be enemies.
Yeah. It was an interesting thing which I'll hold with, and I credit Ambassador Sanjay Kumar Verma of saying he's also served in China. So he said the equation with which Bharat should look at China is that we should collaborate, cooperate where required. We must compete where we can and increase the avenues where we can compete. And most importantly, we must contest or confront where we believe our national interests or our sovereignty is being challenged. So these three C's are the ones and how we'll define our equation with China. So we're neither friends nor foes, we're somewhere in between, but it'll be, all the equations will be straddled between these three C's, and that's how we would engage. So perhaps that's the step forward. But in terms of the takeaways, there are other things which happened there, like an Asim Munir was present. He got more importance than a Shehbaz Sharif did. He also sat down and spoke with President Putin and has stayed back for the China parade. So there is a Pakistan discourse which perhaps is not so important for us as much as the bilateral with Putin, the bilateral with Xi Jinping. Net did Bharat come away with more than just the optics, Rahul?
Yeah, I think, look, fundamentally don't forget that India is also doing things that China does to irritate us. I mean, the Prime Minister went to Japan. He had a dialogue with the Prime Minister there. He talked about the Chinese expansionism in the East China Sea. That was noticed in Beijing. It didn't go down well. But Beijing now has to realize that, it takes two to tango. So if you're going to irritate India by leaning on Pakistan and use that really as the fly in the ointment, so to speak, then India is going to also reciprocate in the ways it knows.
Correct.
You see, as Zaka was saying, what are the Chinese trying to do? They're trying to exert their influence in their sphere of influence. America has its own sphere of influence, which is the Caribbean, the Atlantic. These guys think this is our sphere of influence. But if you look, there's Japan, there's Taiwan, there's Vietnam, there are other countries, there's Philippines, you go out, the Marshall Islands, this, that, all of these contain China's ability to project its maritime power and its influence. With the Quad sitting there, on top of it, it becomes problematic. On top of it, there's this conversation constantly now about containing China. Everyone is sort of ganging up from the West, de-risking, decoupling, to diversify supply chains. So Pakistan and all of that, maybe these minor sort of, sideshows, they realize that if they can sort of wean India away, as you were saying, and sort of bring it into a sort of neutral position, then perhaps they give themselves a bit of breathing space and also unlock a vast market for their goods.
Consumption.
You see, we didn't sign on to the RCEP.
Yeah.
Don't forget that. So that market remains closed to the Chinese. So what was the conversation about there? Let's park some of our differences. Yes, we're going to have a WMCC working group. Let's go there. Let's talk things through. But let's build confidence there. And they have come up with 3 or 4 mechanisms to ensure that, for example, if they're going to be patrolling in a particular area, they'll tell us that they're going there this time. If they're building infrastructure, they'll tip us off. So transparency. But at the same time, they want to build that trade relationship. And therefore, I felt that there's a genuine attempt there to place India on the high table, very optically also. So if you saw Shehbaz Sharif and that entire gang, they were not given prominence the time that Prime Minister was there. It was only the next day that those meetings took place. So that care was taken. Secondly, India has not gone there diluting any of its positions. We never said, okay, Taiwan, we've changed our mind and, now you can, no. On the issue of attending the parade, we said sorry because we can't upset some of our other partners. Philippines wasn't there, Japan wasn't there, on the issue of, so they've been able to solve their border issues with 6, 7, 8 countries, the land ones. But India hasn't conceded, Bhutan hasn't conceded. So we haven't come away there saying that, look, let's now compromise because, we are rattled by what's happening in DC. I think the Chinese have come to us as much as we've also reached out to them.
Interestingly, that's another point, viewers, that in April, Xi Jinping, the Kazan initiative was President Xi Jinping, and in April, President Xi Jinping wrote to President Draupadi Murmu. And that was confirmed by the China ambassador, Zhou Feihang. And he put it out saying that this is what civilizational connect, setting aside issues, talk on security, talk on trade, and let's engage. And we're given to understand that that message was then trickled down. And if you remember, between April and June, President Murmu had lots of meetings. The Prime Minister also met her. Home Minister met her, Foreign Minister met her, and this whole message was conveyed and somewhere, and then Wang Yi's conversation happened and all of that. Now if you look back, then there was a sequence where perhaps the initiation was, and perhaps the Chinese read it, that this is going to happen and we need to try and regroup, and this RIC bloc needs to come together. We're far away from a trilateral conversation, but somewhere I think we also as a nation need to learn a few things from the Chinese or from the Communist Party, if I were to say that, or the PLA. The fact that they have, farsightedness, they're able to see and gaze into the mirror and say how things are, looking glass and say, this is where it is going to be. And the other thing is that as a nation, they're far more driven, collective together, that we need to do this for our country to get to a particular level. They have America as the adversary. We don't have anybody as our adversary, but we can perhaps as a society drive ourselves to that.
That is the focus on all their channels, by the way.
To that
constant
ambition.
Bombardment of what we can be.
Yeah.
Right? Where we came from and what we can be.
See, this what we can be narrative is only starting now here in our country. And the other thing is their presence as state media. We need to learn from Russia. We need to learn from China. We need to learn from Turkey and so many others. That state media becomes a huge amplification of how our nation's narrative is set, internally and also externally. Now, talking that, let's segue back closer home into another big development. We are supposed to focus only on SCO, but then this big reform has kicked in. So your thoughts on that, Zaka? How important is that? And is this going to perhaps further fuel into this growth story?
Look, it has to, because we've had a problem, and the problem was that consumption was just not picking up. I mean, over the last year or so, you spoke to companies like Nestle and Unilever and all that. These are fast-moving consumer goods, and they were, flagging this off over a year ago, almost 18 months ago, that look, people are not buying. These are FMCG, products like toothpaste and shampoos and, Maggi noodles and things like that. People were actually, holding themselves back from spending because they were concerned. They were concerned about their economic, future. They were concerned about their, regular channels of income and so on. So the government had to do something. So the first one was the income tax thing, which they did in the budget earlier this year. So anything up to 12 lakhs was exempt from income tax. So that puts a little bit of money in your pockets. You've got a little more extra disposable income. But the bigger one, and I think the GST one is much bigger than that, simply because of two factors. One, every time you buy a commodity, because of GST, you're paying a tax, right? That's going out of your pocket. Whether it is a pen or a phone or a packet of coffee or whatever it is, you're paying a tax because of GST. Now, if that comes down from 28% down to 18 or from 18 down to 5, that's an incentive for you to spend more, because it'll also negate the effects of inflation. Anyway, inflation is down to about 2% or thereabouts, less than that. But the consumer was not feeling that. the average Indian middle class consumer was feeling like prices have just skyrocketed, right? Whether it's for food items, whether it is for cars, for example.
Yeah.
Right? Cars really, in the last 5 years after COVID, because of all kinds of reasons, I don't want to go into that, but cars, I mean, it was difficult to find a sub 5 lakh car. It was difficult to find a good car at 10 lakhs,
10
which,
lakhs,
which
yeah.
you know, pre-COVID would have been, like you would have been driving a premium sedan at 10 lakhs and thereabouts. So there was a genuine feeling that, look, the government needed to do something to make things more affordable for the middle class. And this is entirely for the middle class. That's the spending class in this country. You know, you've got all kinds of schemes for the poor, you know, Saman Nidhi and this Nidhi and that Nidhi, and, you know, building toilets and all of that. But the middle class was asking, after 10 years, what are you giving us? What's in it for us? So first the income tax, and now this indirect tax. GST is an indirect tax.
Yeah.
So both on the direct tax front and on the indirect tax front, the government has said, okay, we'll take a hit. We'll take a bit of, you know, revenue hit. I think the revenue secretary yesterday said they don't have the exact numbers, but somewhere in the ballpark of 45,000 crores is what the government stands to lose because of the GST reduction. But that's a signaling from the
Yeah,
government.
but there are other indications which say that you know, consumption and GDP push will be to the tune of 5.5 lakh crore. Now, moment that happens, you get scale. And this entire 45,000, 50,000 crore in the near term could then perhaps in the long term be offset because your GST revenues overall will go up because the volumes would increase and scale would increase. What's your reading? Because they've also tried to address the fine print, the back end. You know, getting your GST number, tax terrorism, all of that also, there's been an attempt.
So, you know, Anand, I feel that this should have been done a few years earlier, to be honest.
Yeah, 2017 they brought in GST, it's 2025.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
9 years have passed or whatever it is. And I think they, to their credit, were able to, at least the government was able to build the credibility to bring the states together.
Correct.
First of all. So, you know, first of all, this was done. It wasn't just talked about. Yes, Mr. Modi did a complete U-turn on GST, but nonetheless, it happened when he was Prime Minister. So, important reform. But I think there were just too many brackets. It should have been good and simple from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Because if the logic that is being applied is that it will lead to buoyancy, then that could have been a logic that would have applied 3, 5, 6 years ago. What we've actually seen is a degree of expediency. Let's be honest. There are two elephants in the room. One is the overhang of COVID, which resulted in a lot of stress in MSMEs. And therefore, a lot of middle class India got hit. Wages certainly haven't grown and kept pace with even the nominal inflation. So there was a degree of, as he said, this consumption lag. And because of the headwinds that have started blowing the last couple of years, private investments was also not there.
Yeah.
So you have to, at some level, buoy those, you know, charge those or fire those engines. Otherwise, you're going to be spending constantly, which is what the government was doing to get, you know, liquidity into the system. Hopefully, this will cause credit. But again, there's a lesson here. And the lesson is be foresightful.
Yeah.
You know, be proactive. Take those steps. I felt that, you know, some things could have been done differently earlier.
Yeah, earlier I agree, but the one important part is that this decision is not just the government itself. It's a GST council. So all the states are on board and they have agreed.
Were, you know, I mean, look, on this issue, the opposition constantly talked about Gabbar Singh tax, which was, so this could have been an easy give. Yeah, it could have been an easy give. And now we had to wait for tariffs and this pressure and that pressure.
No,
and, you know, now you're going to sort of say, no, this started a year before. We all know that there's some expediency.
Yeah, there has been expediency. From Diwali, it was advanced to Navratra. That was the expediency that did happen about a month and a half. But you have to have processes in place. And also you had to have revenue collection to a certain level to say that everybody is adapted to the system. The transition, as Sanjeev Sanyal was mentioning, was that at that time the general levies, octroi and all, were in these grades. In around 5, 12, 18, 20, 28 and plus. So let's just put it there and then get everybody on and now narrow it. But it's supposed to be one nation, one tax. So ideally, eventually, it's supposed to come down to about everything
then there's a sin tax. There's a sin tax.
That sin is at 40%, you know, luxury car owners, again, there's again, Perhaps it's the same, but it's
actually-
not. But what
Yeah.
happens is you end up paying less,
Less.
because from the 28% plus another compensation cess of about anywhere between 17 to 22%, we didn't realize it, but we were paying nearly about 45 to 50% tax. Now here GST is without the compensation cess. That's what the finance minister has said. So it will be at 40%. So even the luxury car should be about 5 to 7% cheaper. So if you guys got the money, you know what to go for. So they have already
We're waiting
identified
for
their
wages.
models.
No, small car under 1200 cc. That's what you have to go
What
for.
I've done is I've downgraded from a 650 cc to a 350 cc motorbike. That's there on my bucket list. So I've brought my aspirations down because those bikes are going to be far more cheaper. Anyway, message to Harley Davidson or not, we don't know. Gents, we've just run out of time. Thank you very much for yet another engaging edition of Take 3. We'll be back with more. Namaste.